This is my report on mass shooting as a form of social deviance. The driving question is, what is the race and/or ethnicity of the majority of mass shooters in the United States? I chose this topic because prior research shows that more mass shootings are happening here in the United States. It's also interesting how race is portrayed in our media. Minorities typically get the label of criminals, thugs, violent, whereas whites get that they were mentally ill. It was a cry for help. It was an isolated, tragic event. So it makes narrowing down whether or not one ethnicity commits the crime more than another very hard to figure out. And this will also help contribute to possible research to try to focus on underlying issues that affect maybe a specific race. And that way, sociologists and psychologists can help with possible interventions, resources, etc. I just want to give a brief summary of my literature review. You can read through it while I talk. All of my sources are cited at the end of the slideshow. So the first study confirms that there's a lack of studies surrounding sociological causes of mass murder, which also has to deal with ethnicity because that does include the sociological aspect of this. There's an emphasis in moving on or not re-exploring the event, which means that people are not focusing on studying this to help with prevention. This study also found discrepancies with disciplinary prisms towards mass murderers, which means that they are not being treated equally. So there's an underlying issue that we have to figure out why they are not treated equally. There's a lack of study on whether the disciplinary measures actually have effect. And this study was lacking traits that most mass murderers have instead of proving other traits wrong. For the second article, it points out and it makes a valid point that mass murder depends on the total amount of time over which the murders took place and also along with the number of persons killed. So think, total number of times, the DC sniper situation, it was, an extended period of time, so that wouldn't necessarily be considered a mass murder. Analysis of prior shootings showed that certain factors such as frustration and bullying paired with personal characteristics such as gender, age, and being a loner can contribute to whether or not someone commits mass murder. So we have these different pieces of whether or not someone is more susceptible to committing mass murder, but it lacks an analysis on the race or the ethnicity and whether or not that's a characteristic. In the next source that I had, it claims that psychological research is influenced by outside forces. An example of that would be the focus on violent video games that kids are playing and trying to make that into why they commit mass murder. And there's absolutely no substantial evidence for that. But this is used as a defense in court cases and trials for mass murder as well as homicide. This shows that, studies are not focused on where they should be. This article, these people studied 37 shootings, school shootings, and found that 98% of the perpetrators experienced a major loss before the event, 78% envisioned or tried to commit suicide, and 61% had a history of depression. So just within those 37 school shootings that they analyzed, they found 3 different possible topics that could explain or could be possible warning signs for someone who could possibly commit this crime. In the next analysis, it showed that contrary to, most crimes that are committed by minorities, the crime of mass murder is actually committed by whites. It analyzed sociological and behavioral concepts to try and understand why white people are committing this crime more. And it found that it's possible that the structural advantages that white people have are associated with mass murder, that shootings are rooted in their lawful sense of social privilege and entitlement, and also that white men have the highest level of achievement here in the United States, so to not achieve that could cause a strain and could possibly cause somebody to break. But this leaves out the question of how does society view race when it comes to the matter of mass murder. So in the next article, it studied how the different ethnicities and the race of mass murderers are portrayed in the media. They studied 433 documents that covered the incident of mass shootings and mass murder, and the results suggested that white shooters' mental health serves to mitigate the image of a moral offender. So it casts that person off as being a victim of society, a victim of their illness, that it was just a tragic event and a cry for help. It also confirmed that blacks are less likely to be framed as mentally ill compared to whites or Latinos, and that when both blacks and Latinos are discussed as mentally ill, attention is more frequently drawn to criminal traits and histories of violence. So, as I said before, they're criminals, they're thugs, they have a violent past, whereas white people, they are more mitigated towards being mentally ill and that something is wrong with them, which is why that happened. This also shows and proves that the topic of mass shooting and mass murder is not being addressed fairly across ethnicities. My research method that I chose was secondary data analysis. This method takes and examines pre-existing data to form new conclusions from that data set. So for me, as I said, the focus has never clearly been on the ethnicity of the shooting, to help dig deeper into why that ethnicity may play a role in committing mass murder. So ethnicity is the new factor that I am focusing on. My hypothesis for this is that white males commit more mass shootings and murders than their counterparts, and that's just because of a preconceived notion that I have. Any coverage that I've watched regarding mass murder and mass shooting are by white people. So that's kind of why that hypothesis came about. The problems and difficulties that I faced was that mass shootings and the coverage of them don't always focus on the race or the ethnicity or mention it. So you're having to look for photographs of that person's family, or someone speaking specifically to it in order for you to know. And that this also in turn lacks whether or not socioeconomic differences play a role in mass murders. So we can't confirm white privilege or white rage as a possible factor. I just wanted to briefly show the data set that I was dealing with. This is not the full set of data, but this is just a clear view for you to see. These are the labels at the top that I focused on. All of the rows include, these are the ones that I focused on, but I do want to tell you all of the rows that I got from Mother Jones. This is a data set that you can look up online. This is all mass shootings in the United States from 1982 to the present. All of the rows include the case, location, date, and summary of what happened, the fatalities, injuries, and the total of those, the location, the age, and prior signs of mental illness, and what details they have on that. Whether or not the weapons were obtained legally and where, the weapon type and details, and then the race and gender of the shooter, as well as the sources that they got this from. So that was very important to me, and this was the best set of data that I found because I could look at the credibility of these sources. It also tells us what type of shooting it was and the year. For the analysis of the data, there was 110 shootings reported. Both shooting sprees and mass shootings were included in this. As I said, a shooting spree is that someone committed the crime of murder, but then they were shooting in more than one area. Mass shootings are all of the deaths and injuries are focused around one event. Think Sandy Hook or Columbine. For a shooting spree, the ethnicity, 7 white, 1 Native American, 3 Latino, 3 Black, 2 Asian. For mass shootings, it was 57 white, 2 Native American, 7 Latino, 15 Black, 6 Asian, and 7 other. For the total percentages of these groups, whites committed 59%, Native American 3%, Latino 9%, Black 16%, Asian 7%, and others 6%. So as we know, most crime is committed by minorities, but here 59% was committed by white people. Mental illness was also something I wanted to take a look at, whether or not these people showed signs of mental illness before. White had 37 yes, 15 unclear, 9 no. Native American had 2 unclear, 1 yes. Latino had 5 yes, 4 unclear, 1 no. Blacks had 6 yes, 6 unclear, 6 no. Asians had 7 yes, 1 uncertain, and the other group had 1 yes, 5 unclear, and 1 no. So as a whole, with this group, 52% had prior signs of mental health issues that committed these murders. And finally, the last thing I wanted to look at was gender, and 96% of mass killings were committed by males. So only 4 involved a female, and one of these I do want to note was both a male and a female, but 4 females and 106 males committed these crimes. To take a look at this data from our book standpoint, mass murder is considered an example of mala and se, meaning that they are bad within themselves. And it's also a common law crime. So these crimes include offenses that virtually everyone would regard as criminal. Mass murder would fall under that as well. And our book states that mass murder is the only murder in which whites commit more than minorities. We also know from our book that personal violence in urban areas is highest among males, and our data set also proved that in the majority of mass shooters being male. Offenders kill and assault others with whom they likely share group interactions, and this correlates to some of the shootings that occurred in the data in regards to workplace violence, to schools. They had some sort of tie or connection to that place. Also that Murder offenders do not engage in criminal careers, nor do they progress to more serious criminal careers. This explains the shock factor that happens when they're interviewing people and stuff, why no one saw it coming, why, they didn't anticipate that from that person. Also, the book mentioned Adam Lanza and Sandy Hook shooting, December 2012, that Congress has not passed any significant reforms since. So this explains, kind of why shootings in America keep happening, that there has been no actual reform and no actual help for them. And this is our book down here. These are a few quotes that I took from the Bible. The first one, Exodus 21:12, and then also 14. Anyone who strikes a man and kills him shall surely be put to death. And 14 was, but if a man schemes and kills another man deliberately, take him away from my altar and put him to death. So, also Exodus 21:23 says, but if there is a serious injury, you are to take life for life. So this shows that God is giving, this instruction, that God is the ultimate judge and the ultimate ruler of whether or not someone is able to die or someone is able to be killed. Underneath, I also thought it was important to speak about revenge, because some of these killings are based off of revenge or rage. Leviticus 19:18 says, do not seek revenge or bear a grudge against anyone among your people, but love your neighbor as yourself. Romans 12:19 says, do not take revenge, my dear friends, but leave room for God's wrath, for it is written, it is mine to avenge, I will repay, says the Lord. So this is also important to note, that we should not be taking revenge upon ourselves. We should not be choosing to, commit these murders and things. If someone is committed a wrongdoing against you, someone has done something against you, that doesn't mean that you get to turn around and do something such as committing mass murder, because as we see, there are so many people that are affected by mass murder, and a lot of times people are killed that have nothing to do with the person, with the situation. They've never seen them before, which you can see down here at Columbine, the two shooters who came in with, high impact guns, who were just, trying to cause as much harm as they could. And that goes back to the very beginning of the Bible that we need to focus on, which is here, the 10 Commandments. The second commandment was to love your neighbor as you love yourself. John 3:11, for this is a message you heard from the beginning. We should love one another. And I thought that was very important to include in the end of this, because, everybody goes through different things. Everybody has to deal with the different things. And I understand that, mental health could possibly be an issue, and sometimes it's misconstrued for people. But if we focus on this here and loving one another, then we can worry about less of this. We don't have to worry about whether or not our kids are safe. We don't have to worry about whether or not we are safe in public. I just wanted to put a few things in closing regarding this. The current research that I just did and what I focused on in the Mother Jones data set shows that the majority of mass shooters and murderers are white males. So it's important to understand why it's males and why they're white males that are committing this crime. This is particularly important regarding race and ethnicity, because white people do not commit the majority of any other crime. So it's very important in America to understand why specifically white males are committing this crime, but they're not committing other crimes at the same rate. And also an important study for the future, as I said, why does it differ by race? Why are so many of them committed by white men? And then I just wanted to give one more biblical reminder regarding this information. I put Luke 6:31, and that's, and as you wish that others would do to you, do so to them. And that's important just to keep at the forefront when we're looking at mass shootings, we're looking at the ugliness of it. But if we take time to infuse more biblical reminders, more of the Word of God into what we're seeing, then we can, do a better job of making sure that this does not happen. And it also has to do with facing the fact that, yes, white men commit more of these crimes. So let's look into it. Let's research it. Because minorities have been, labeled as criminals for such a long time. It's time to put aside the fact that, whites are the majority, and just look into the research to figure out why they're committing these crimes so that we can actually help. And finally, this is my reference page. I want to make sure that all of this is noted in here. My 5 articles from my literature review are in here, the Bible where I got the biblical quotes from, and this is the Mother Jones website here. Anybody can go to it and see the data that I pulled. and be able to come up with the same information. So that's my project.